Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Golf. I'm your host, PGA Professional Mark Guttenberg. Let's Talk Golf is a bi-weekly podcast featuring all things relevant to the golf industry, the world of golf, the game of golf, anything golf. That's what we're about. Back in January of 2017, earlier this year actually, I was contacted by a podcast show called Northern Virginia Advice Givers. Show host Ryan Sloper asked me if I'd be willing to come on to the show and give advice relevant to the world of golf. Naturally, since I was interested in starting my own podcast show, I agreed, and I'm glad I did. Ryan is a great host. He gave me a chance to see how he operates his podcast show and was gracious enough to let me use his interview on my show to share that with you. So without further ado, here's the interview with yours truly on Northern Virginia Advice Givers podcast show with show host Ryan Sloper.
Hi everyone, Ryan Sloper, Northern Virginia Advice Givers Podcast, a podcast for bringing you the best advice from our community's brightest minds. Our mission, purpose, soul driving factor is to create a movement of impact. We want to grow, strengthen the chain of inspiration, and one way we can do this is to better tell the stories of the business owners, entrepreneurs in our community. These are the people solving real problems. Welcome everyone to the latest episode. Again, Northern Virginia Advice Givers Podcast. Today, I'd like to introduce to you our guest, PGA professional with over 40 years of experience in the sport, Mark Guttenberg. Mark is the founder of Guttenberg's golf development programs. Prior to this, he lived out a lifelong dream as a competitor on the 1982 PGA Tour. Now serving as Director of Instruction at Bull Run Golf Club in Haymarket, Virginia, he continues to teach the game of golf. Mark has also offered his helpful golf tips through his column, Let's Talk Golf, featured in the Fauquier Times, Gainesville Times, and Loudoun Times-Mirror. Welcome, Mark.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ryan. I'm really looking forward to this podcast.
Absolutely. So I wanted to first start. So I know that you have been involved with the game of golf for over, 50 years at this point?
That's about right.
Yeah, having played and instructed. I always find it fascinating to find out where it all started. Could you take me back maybe in your childhood to where maybe you picked up your first golf club and what inspired you to get involved with the game of golf?
Absolutely. Yeah, my dad played golf. In fact, my dad is 90 years old and he still plays golf. But when I was about 9, 10 years old, he'd have a weekly foursome that they would go out and they played a golf course called the Washingtonian Country Club in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And I got to come along every now and then to caddy for him. I'd take the little pull cart out there and I kind of got hooked on the game a little bit. But they had their annual picnic where the foursome would get together in somebody's backyard and cook out. And I picked up one of the clubs they had lying around and I started swinging it. And one of the guys in the group said, your son's got a natural swing. You ought to let him take some golf lessons. And that's kind of where it all started. I started playing golf at the age of 10 and knew right away I was going to be a golf pro.
I was just curious. So it seemed like it kind of stemmed obviously with your dad there. And then it was just like that passion kicked in, right?
Yeah. And there was just one moment that sticks out of my mind even to this day. And especially with the recent passing of Arnold Palmer. At 11 years old, my dad took me to the U.S. Open at Congressional Country Club. That was where Ken Venturi won the famous U.S. Open, walking 36 holes and passed out. But the first golfer I saw was Arnold Palmer on the putting green. And he had this knock-kneed putting stance and this really charismatic way about him. And when I saw that, I just knew I got to do this one day.
That's awesome. So Arnold Palmer, that was basically the inspiration there. So obviously you played on the PGA Tour at one point. You won, over 100 plus events.
Not on the PGA Tour, just pro-ams and local tournaments and stuff.
Yeah, in the Mid-Atlantic region, right? Wasn't it something like that?
Correct.
Yeah, so, you had a lot of success and, obviously that kind of evolved. Your passion stayed with the game afterwards to lead you down the path of instruction and teaching others. I'm curious also, and I wanted to touch on this because your wife is also involved in your business. So tell me how that kind of unfolded, how you met her, and then how that kind of evolved into a business relationship for you.
Well, it's actually a funny story. I met her at Florida State University in 1973, and we lived in the same dorm. And as it turned out, unbeknownst to me, She had cut out a picture of Johnny Miller in the newspaper when he won the U.S. Open that year. Johnny Miller's wife had her head on his shoulder. He had his arm around her, and he's holding the trophy. And so here comes this girl out of the elevator at Smith Hall at Florida State, and she just came back from dinner, and I was cooking dinner. Well, we both kind of locked eyes. She went back to her room to get a pan to boil some water to make it look like she had an excuse to be there. And we start talking, and she says, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I was there on a scholarship, played on the Florida State golf team. I said, I'm going to be a golf pro. And she had this picture clipped out because she had it in her mind one day she was going to marry a golf pro. So ding, 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 this must be the guy, right? And ironically, 30 years later, I was playing in the U.S. Senior Open, and Johnny Miller interviewed us, and we told that story to him, and we had the newspaper clipping with us. But as far as how Leslie got into the business, back in 1987, I was hired on at Prince William Golf Club as the director of instruction there. And Leslie was working in the corporate world, had her master's in special education. She was brilliant communicator, but very unhappy in the corporate world. So I convinced her to come work with me. She had been my kind of coach without having the technology behind it. Whenever she saw my swing and something was off, she could describe it to me in a way that might not have been the right vocabulary that a teaching pro would use, but I would know exactly what she meant. I said, you could be great as a teacher. We could work together and teach together and do golf schools together. You just need to spend a little time with me, watching me teach. I'll take you to a couple of schools and get you right. And sure enough, she quit her job. She came to work with me, became one of the top teachers in the LPGA. She won the LPGA Teacher of the Year of the Northeast section, and I think it was 2000. And the rest is history. We've been kind of teaching together ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always find it interesting when you have a husband and wife kind of team working out there in business. And it seems like, your story is amazing how you guys met and how this whole thing has evolved over time. I'm curious, give some of our listeners kind of like the background of like where you started with your instruction and teaching golf and kind of how that's evolved now to you actually have your own facility in your backyard, which I find awesome. I wish that one day I could do the same, but I like to just kind of tell people, where you started and then kind of how that's evolved over time.
Are you talking more as a teacher where I started or as a player?
As a teacher.
So as I got serious about my own game, I took lessons from a gentleman named Bill Strasbaugh. He was the head pro at Columbia Country Club in Chevy Chase, Maryland. The coach, as he was known, he was a great mentor to me. And Coach would he'd have a way of communicating that just made you feel good. And every time I went there, I left just feeling like Superman. And I felt like I could conquer the world. And to be honest with you, I played on the PGA Tour in 1982. Didn't make enough money to keep my playing privileges. Truth of the matter, I was very good, but they were great. I just wasn't good enough to make a living on the PGA Tour. I could win local events, but these guys, they basically had backing. I didn't have enough financial backing to keep pounding the tour and see what I could do. So I decided to go back. I was a head pro at a club called Penderbrook in Fairfax. It's still there. And I started to become more involved in teaching. And finally, I decided to leave Penderbrook when they built a lot more houses, took away our driving range. And I got a call from a gentleman named Charlie Staples who had 9 golf courses that he wanted teachers at. Now, I was really just hired to come to Prince William. He said, Mark, we've got 60,000 rounds a year here and nobody's giving golf lessons. I want a quality instructional program, but I don't want to pay anybody for it, but I'm going to give you 60,000 customers in a facility to do it at. Are you interested? To me, I jumped at that. And so that really, I think, was the beginning of my specialization as a teacher. I went on and was a head pro at a golf course in Leesburg at West Park, but even there I ran golf schools and I became so enamored by the aspect of teaching. The idea that people would come to me to talk about something I love so dearly, pay me money to make them better at what they could do. I couldn't believe I could make a living at that. I said, this is it. And I have to tell you the gratification that you get when somebody leaves with a smile. They come there all disappointed and distracted. And all of a sudden you give them something. And they start seeing that ball go better than it's ever gone before. It was just heartwarming, to say the least. So that's where it all really kind of grew from.
You had said that your coach made you feel like Superman. I'm curious, could you put your finger on like what it was specifically that he did or said? Was it the confidence that he had in you, or the belief, the motivation? Can you put your finger on what it was that always left you feeling so motivated?
Well, yeah, back then I still was dead set on going on the PGA Tour. And, it's very competitive out there, and you have to have a certain level of physical ability that, I think they all have that out there. Then there's a mental ability. But when I went to see Bill Strasbaugh for a lesson, whatever I was struggling with, he always seemed to have the answers. He could get me hitting the ball, like a touring pro in about 15 minutes. And I even remember the very first shot I ever hit on a golf course that I felt was pro quality. You hit shots when you're a kid, you shoot good rounds, but you don't hit it like the guys on tour. And I was playing golf with a guy. It was the 13th hole at Washingtonian Country Club. I was about 13 years old, and I pulled out an 8-iron from like 150 yards. That was a long way back then. And I hit this ball, and it hit on the green, and it spun back about 10 feet. Well, that was Bill Strasbaugh. That was the coach that gave me that. So when I say I felt like Superman, I felt like I could conquer the world. I felt like I could really achieve my dreams. And, I think that's what I try to do is really try to instill in my students that they can do what they want to do. But there's a process.
Yeah. And I tend to find that so that was probably one of your key influences in your life, right? That coach. And that gave you that feeling, and then how that's now translated over to probably the feeling that you give your students, right? It tends to pass down. And I always find that with the greatest teachers, it was always the teacher that they had that, allows them to then make their students great, right? And then maybe one day your student turns into a teacher. I find that it's amazingly fascinating to me, like how you go back and actually dig deeper, that it's just, there's always that inspiration, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And to this day, I'll be on the lesson tee. I'll fold my arms a certain way or put my hand on my chin. And I remember that's what the coach used to do, and I draw from those experiences. So absolutely, I try to inspire young men that are wanting to get in the business too, and try to give back like he gave to me.
It's a perfect segue. So let's talk about some of your students. Are there any success stories that come to mind? I mean, obviously you've taught thousands and thousands of lessons, but is there any one or two that, are very top of mind for you?
Well, yeah, through the years, everybody is special in their own way. I take almost more joy out of watching a 30 handicap, which is somebody that's can't break 100, and watching them shoot in the low 90s or break 80. That's exciting for me, but there's quite a few of those stories I could tell you, but there's two stories in particular that maybe stand out. One is a young man on the PGA Tour named Billy Hurley III. Billy won his first PGA Tour event last year at the Quicken Loans right here in our hometown. He was from Leesburg, Virginia, grew up at West Park Golf Club where I was the head pro and teaching pro there. And I worked with Billy for about 12 years on and off. He went to the Naval Academy and he really blossomed under the coach Pat Owens there. And then afterwards, he went on and worked with a gentleman named Mitch Spearman, which I think he still does. So I certainly don't deserve all the credit for Billy's success, but the relationship that I had with Billy, his dad, his family, his brother, who also took lessons from me, will always stick with me. And to see Billy come through such great trials and tribulations of trying to make it in that world, it's fantastic. There's actually, I'll tell you two quick stories about some juniors. I have some really exciting relationship with juniors on all levels, but there's a U.S. Kids Tour for those listeners that don't really know what that is. That's kind of like a full-fledged, almost PGA Tour style organization that has a World Championship every year. The PGA, the U.S. Kids World Championship is held at Pinehurst. Last year, I was lucky enough to have 6 of my students, some former students, make it to the World Championship. So I drove down there, surprised them all. Nobody knew I was coming. I had to find 6 different tee times on 4 different golf courses throughout the course of the day. But I want to highlight 2 kids in particular because one of them you will see on television Sunday, April 2nd at Augusta. Her name is Catherine Q. Catherine came to me at 7 years old, Chinese. Her parents were just very supportive. They brought her to me in the winter. It was February. We were at Bull Run Golf Club, the other place I teach. We have indoor facility with heated lamps. And anyway, long story short, the father says, I want Catherine to play in the U.S. Kids World Championship this summer. This girl had never played golf before. And so, I'm not a dream crusher. I don't want to tell anybody they can't. I said, well, that's quite a lofty goal. Long story short, She not only played in the World Championship that year, but she finished 10th in the world for 7 years old. And now she is qualified for the drive, chip, and putt at Augusta this April. So my wife and I are going to drive down and watch Catherine. Catherine's moved on to other instructors, but we still stay in touch. Every time she wins a tournament, I send them a note, and we're good friends. And I was like the first person they called when she qualified for it. And so that's a very exciting story. Another really exciting story is a young man who is now 11 years old. His name is Sihan Sandhu. Sihan, last year in the World Championship, broke every scoring record in the history of the U.S. Kids Championship. He shot 23 under par for 3 rounds of golf. 63, 62, 68. He won by 17 shots. And again, Sihan was one of my former students that just really had a work ethic. He really, he had something special. You know, a lot of kids have beautiful swings, but this kid had heart. Catherine had heart. Billy Hurley had heart. These are some things that as a teacher, you don't count on, but they're gifts when they come your way.
And you know, you recently had put out an article, I believe, on your website also about raising a champion, right? I think that it is interesting, and it is something I wanted to get your take on, because I know that, you know, one of the things in sports, and, you know, I mentioned to you off this call that I had played college basketball, but growing up, and your parents obviously are huge influences in your life and pushing you different directions, and some parents get more involved than others. And I wanted you to speak on what has been your experience, or the most refreshing take that parents could have on developing their kids when it comes to playing golf, or any sport for that matter, because I think your article really does speak for any sport that a kid could be interested in, and the way that they should go about assisting that child in moving forward without necessarily pressuring them or stepping over the line. Because I have always found that I was more inclined as an athlete to pay more attention to what my coach was saying than what my parents would, right? I always wanted to impress the coach, not necessarily my parents, but yet it was important to get the feedback from my parents, right? So I know that you've had a lot of experience with that, and I'm just interested to see what you found to be a successful model.
Well, that is a great question. And, you know, there's a movie out followed by a TV show called The Short Game. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a documentary that profiles the lives of parents and their child as they progress on this U.S. Kids World Championship Tour. It's really heartbreaking when you see some of these parents and how much pressure that they put on their kids. And I'm not going to lie to you, over the years, I've seen plenty of that in person. But as I've mentioned, these 3 champions, Catherine and Sihan and Billy, I've seen some of the best examples of great parenting. And what's the difference? You know, you bring up the question, what is my experience of how parents should help their kids? And support is important. You've got to be there for your kids, but it can't be a pressure support. It's got to be, I love you no matter what. This has got to come from you. It can't be the parent trying to live their dreams out through their children. So when you hire a coach, like you said, that child is going to want to put a lot of faith in that coach. And it's not uncommon for a parent to come to a lesson with their child, and I will say something to them, to the child in front of the parents. And I encourage the parents to watch the lessons, just not to actively interrupt during the lesson, but watch it. And I might say the exact same thing that a parent said. And of course, the parent will chime right in and say, well, that's what I told them. But you're the parent. You're used to giving them orders, and there's going to come a point where they're going to want to step out on their own. And anyway, you're paying me to give my expertise on what they should do. So be supportive of what the coach does, whether it's me or anybody else. If your child is taking lessons, find out from the coach and from your child what the coach wants you to do. Be supportive. I've had plenty of opportunities to help kids, give them a lesson. They'll come back 2 weeks later. I'll say, well, what did you work on? And I've already got everything written down that we worked on. I'm looking for specific answers, and they're giving me answers that have very little to do with what the lesson was about, a whole lot more about what their parents thought they should do. And we usually have a conversation about that, either with the parents separately or with everybody in the room. But I think being able to trust that your coach has the best interest for your child. So on that note, don't just hire any coach because somebody had a good experience with them. I'll give you an example with Sihan, who was 11 years old, and this kid he's won international, he's won all over the world. his parents came to meet me with Sihan and their brother and sister, and we sat down in my house for an hour, neither one of us knowing if we were going to take this on. And it was, it was the relationship building, the rapport that we were able to build. They'd done their research on me. I knew about the golf swing, but that's not what makes a great coach. A great coach has to know more than the mechanics of a golf swing. You have to be able to motivate your students. You have to be able to empower them and believe in them no matter what. And you have to realize there's going to be good days and bad days. And how do you keep them going? How do you get them up? What's really important? And I think that falls on the coach, not the parent. So to the parent, I would say support the coach as much as you can. I realize sooner or later I'm going to get fired by everybody. Butch Harmon's been fired by 3 of the best top number 1 golfers in the world. He got fired by Greg Norman. He got fired by Tiger Woods. He's been fired by Phil Mickelson. The list goes on. So, it's really not about how great the coach is. It's really about how great the parents are. So all the successes that my kids have had, I own very little of that credit. It's what the parents have done to support and follow up the development of the kids that makes the difference, if they can do it in a loving and nurturing way.
Yeah, I would say that you should get some credit. I do believe that there's something to, and I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Tony Robbins talks a lot about modeling, right? And modeling is find somebody that is been successful in something that they're now teaching, right? So you've been there, you've done that. Then not only that, you take it to the next step, which is now they're teaching and they actually have a product underneath them, another student, right, that has gone on and been successful as well, because you've proven it in both ways. And looking for a coach in anything, I think that you should always be paying attention to those two things, not just somebody who's saying that they've done something, but has actually proven it, right, for themselves and then for somebody else.
Absolutely. And I'll be honest, I think that's one of the things that Sihan's parents, when they brought him to me, they liked the fact that Billy Hurley was on the PGA Tour and I had coached him when he was a kid. So sure, I've had something to do with it. I kind of look at it more when I look at Billy Hurley because I was more there in the earlier stages, but at least I didn't screw him up. I didn't mess him. And, we joke about that, but there are so many horror stories about very talented kids that were winning, and all of a sudden they went to a top-ranked coach, and their game just went downhill. Now, is it the fault of the coach? Maybe sometimes yes, maybe sometimes no. There's got to be accountability on everyone's side, but it's kind of like when you resist. This goes back to what I was referring earlier. You go to a coach and that coach is maybe pushing you in a direction that you don't think you should go. That can create conflict. Now, that coach might be dead on with where you should go, but if that conflict exists and you and the parents and the kids aren't on the same page, nobody's going to win.
Yeah. So let's now kind of switch a little bit of direction. I want to get more specific advice from you. And I know this is kind of going to be more selfish questions, but I actually think that it's going to help a lot of people, right? So first question is, so I have a almost 6-year-old son, and he is one of those where daddy picks up a basketball, he wants to pick up a basketball. Daddy picks up a golf club, he wants to pick up a golf club. And my whole thing has always been to expose, not to push, right? So I expose him to as many things as possible. And then what I tend to find is if he finds success, he wants to go further. He wants to dig a little bit deeper, right? And then naturally you might be, a little bit better at one thing versus another. So golf, like he's already talking like, Daddy, when are we going to get out to play this year? Now, he's only 5 and he likes to just smack the ball around a little bit, but now I'm at the point where, okay, like he wants to do it. What are your recommendations for a 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old, or a younger kid that's looking to, getting interested in the sport, and you really want to help promote or help him find out whether it's something he is really interested in? Do you recommend that that kid or parents of that child start with lessons so that they can learn the right way, which would then potentially give them the confidence to want to proceed forward with that sport?
Great question there, Ryan. I have a son who is now 26 who grew up not wanting to play golf, even though both parents were golf pros. His statement to us when he was about 8 years old, he says, Mom and Dad, you cast too big a shadow. I want to create my own image, and I don't want to walk behind you guys. And so he didn't really want to play golf when he was a kid, and we didn't push him. As he got older into high school and played 4 years of football, the guys on the football team were into golf. They said, Taylor, let's go out and play golf. Your dad can get us on any golf course. Come on, let's do it. And all of a sudden, Taylor got interested in it. So when the time came, I nurtured it, but I never pushed him. Now, back to your 6-year-old and any of the young kids that haven't played yet, I look at golf as in 3 stages. The first stage has to be the romance stage. You've got to fall in love with what you're doing. And think about your wife that you met before you got serious about her and you were courting her. In that romance stage, did you tell her everything she was doing wrong or everything you didn't like about her? I mean, if you did, you wouldn't have lasted very long. And that's the same in golf. If you start these kids off with too much instruction and too much mechanical, aspect, that's not good. They got to play. They got to have fun. It's a ball and a stick and a target. There's a company called Snag Golf, SNAG Golf, that uses small tennis balls and Velcro and huge golf clubs. And you can set up a target in your backyard with this big club and a ball and have them hit until the ball sticks at the target. All of a sudden, hey, this is fun. Now let's try a real ball. And all of a sudden, that thing's going like 3 times as far. Take them out on the golf course. Let them ride with you in the golf cart. This is part of that romance stage. Get them to fall in love, but it's got to be a fun thing. So junior camps are a great way to start them out because they're around other kids. They learn safety rules. They play games. If a junior camp is done well, it's not just going to be golf instruction. They're going to be running relay races. They're going to make the environment user-friendly. The second stage after you kind of got them hooked and they really do like the game, the second stage is what we call the precision stage. This is where you start to get precise with how to hold the club, how to aim, how to swing, things like that. But even that has to be done in a delicate way with kids because you can't talk down to them. You can't expect them to do a lot of the really technical things, but you can really get them to mirror. They're great at mirroring. So we teach them little basics. We teach them to pivot. And I think the junior camp is a great way to go. And then if they're still into it, these U.S. kids tournaments that I talked about actually started age 6 and under. Now, there's some argument that this U.S. kids is just too tough, too much pressure. A lot of that goes on. So it has to come from the child. You can't live your dreams through your child by making them do the things they need to do to be successful. When my son was about 8 years old, his dad's flat-footed, he's flat-footed, and we have a little basketball court out in the backyard, and we're shooting hoops and stuff. He says, Dad, do you think I could ever make it in the NBA? And again, I'm not going to crush his dreams, but I said, I think you can do anything you want to do, but you have to be doing the work that nobody else is willing to do. And if you're willing to do that in anything in life, I believe in you, son. I think you can make it. So lots of encouragement to your kids. Don't tell them how bad they are. Don't compare them to other people that are better than them. I love you no matter what. I'm proud of you for trying, and this is fun. Let's do something together. I have to tell you, some of the most enjoyable moments I have on a golf course is with my son now. He's 25, but when we go out and play, there's no better time to kind of spend 4 hours with your son telling you all life secrets, and it's the greatest game in the world for that. The third stage is just kind of go out and play and enjoy the game.
That's fine. So that's, I think a huge question because I think a lot of parents that are, maybe they never played golf, but maybe their kid was interested and a lot of the times I find that parents tend to push their kids in the direction that they went. Right? So there's really never truly the exposure of all these other sports. So now I'm going to transition to the other question, which was what you would call your novice golfer out there, me, right? The hacker, the guy that's going out there, but enjoys golf, like it loves everything that comes with it. It's the mental game, the physical game, just enjoying the camaraderie on the golf course. And let's just say that this golfer is just starting out, not concerned about scoring per se, but just wants improvement and, wants to be able to strike the ball clean and just get better day by day. Lessons for this person or mindset, where should they start?
Well, first they should start with a qualified instructor. And, I have all types of students. I have beginners. I have people that haven't ever had a golf lesson before and been playing for quite a while. So you're my average student. You're my guy that I see. And I think the first and most important thing, even if you just took 1 or 2 lessons, is the basic fundamentals of how to hold the golf club, how to grip the club. We'll break it down into 4 letters, GASP, GASP, grip, aim, stance, posture. If you don't do those correctly, your swing will not evolve properly. Imagine riding your car when the front end alignment is out. It's not going to take very long before those tires get worn out and you have an accident or the universal joint is out. So getting your alignments right, understanding how to aim properly, how to get your posture in a way that you can make the best shoulder turn and hip turn, the grip pressure. So fundamentals are very important, and you can read about them in magazines. So always had to go for a lesson to do that. But the one thing about a magazine is it doesn't look at you and tell you if you're doing it right or wrong. So what if you misinterpreted it? And unfortunately, this is the biggest problem we have in golf instruction. There's so many different opinions on how to teach. There's so many different styles. Now with new technology, the launch monitors, Flight Scope, TrackMan, where we can measure everything a golf ball does, it gets to be so technical. And then what happens is this new science is actually proving some of the things that we used to say are wrong. Well, are they really wrong if I told somebody to do it and they got better and they enjoyed the game more? So I think the type of lessons that you get have a lot to do with you as an individual and your personality. So, first part of every lesson for me is an interview. I want to know more about that student. One of my first questions I'll ask a new student, or almost any student, is what would you like to get out of today's lesson? It may be unrealistic, whatever they're thinking, and it's my job to kind of direct them in the right direction. But I think you have to have, as a novice golfer, you got to have the fundamentals. That's key.
That's good advice. And I think, a lot of the times we tend to watch these YouTube videos or where people are giving these tactics or tips, and all of a sudden you think the next time you're going to show up on the golf course, that's going to solve the problem. But inevitably, the fundamentals were still screwed up, so those tips don't work. The age of the internet has led to a lot of this, right? Because it seems everybody thinks that they can shortcut. And I'm sure there are some shortcuts that coaches can teach or to speed up those things, but naturally muscle memory and all the other things have to take place. So I am a huge proponent of coaching in all aspects of life. I think it's amazing how long you've been in the game of golf and that you still have this passion and drive. I'm curious, where are you headed from here? Do you still see yourself giving lessons another 5-10 years from now, or do you see bigger things on the horizon?
Well, yeah, that's a question I ask myself a lot here lately. I'm 64 years old. I've been playing since I was 10. I've been a pro for 43 years, and I still love golf. I still love teaching golf, but I like to be challenged. I like to birth new ideas. And ironically, your podcast business is something I'm very interested in looking into. I've been a staff writer for magazines, done radio and television. But one thing I would like to do is start getting inside the heads of a guy after he's won a golf tournament, stand there with a mic and interview him afterwards, or talk to one of the top teachers and get their perspective and have a weekly or monthly podcast business going on, not necessarily as a business that I can make money at, although I wouldn't turn it down, but as something I can do to give something back. I meet with so many interesting people in all aspects of the golf industry, and I could share some stories with you and the public through a podcast business that I think would be awesome. And I have the background for it. So I'm really interested actually in learning a lot from you, Ryan, on how you've gone about doing this. So you might be getting some phone calls from me after this podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. Like I said, I think it's any time that you can have somebody that's been in and around a sport for so long, you have so much to offer. You have so much experience to pull from. You have so many stories. There's this connection point that most people that might get into the podcast industry, they don't have, right? It's somebody that says, yes, I want to have a golf podcast, but they don't truly haven't immersed themselves over the years in it. So you're going to have a completely different perspective. And I think it actually would be a great thing for you to consider for sure. I want to thank you for coming on, Mark. I think it's been an amazing podcast to give our listeners an opportunity to expose themselves to you and your business. Where can people go if they want to find out more about you and your golf instruction? What's the easiest place to go website-wise and any other social media that you have?
Well, I have a website called guttenbergsgolf.com. Guttenberg is spelled E-R-G, and there's no apostrophe when you do the plural, guttenbergsgolf.com. It's got contact information, email information. I also am the director of instruction for Raspberry Golf Schools out at Bull Run Golf Club in Haymarket. They can call me there. Again, my phone number is on the website, so all the information they would need to find me is right there.
Awesome. We'll also put up in the show notes once we get the podcast live, we'll put website links and all that stuff so that people connect with you directly through the podcast as well. Once again, Mark, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to catching up with you real soon.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Real pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Well, that concludes this episode of Let's Talk Golf. Thank you very much to Northern Virginia Advice Givers show host Ryan Sloper. I would highly recommend you check out their podcast. Go to northernvirginiaadvicegivers.com and you'll find there's a variety of topics from financial investing, massage therapy, physical fitness, you name it. I'm honored to be part of their show now, and I hope you will tune in to another one of our shows, Let's Talk Golf, in 2 weeks. I'm your host, PGA Professional Mark Guttenberg. Remember, if you have any questions or would like to give us comments or feedback on the show, go to guttenbergsgolf.com. That's GUTTENBERGS golf.com and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. So tune in 2 weeks for the next episode of Let's Talk Golf. Look forward to seeing you then.